Around the year 900, the Navajo people, who call themselves Diné, settled between their four sacred mounds in the southwest: Mount Blanco, Cisnagini to the east, Mount Taylor, Tsoltse to the south, San Francisco Peaks, Dok Oosli to the west, and Mount Hesperus, Debed-Nitsa to the north. Navajo oral histories tell us that they have lived within the boundaries of these mounds for over 1,000 years up until the year 1864. They had homes called Hogans. Some had farms and raised livestock, and all were prosperous, living off of the land. After sheep were introduced by the Spanish in the late 1500s, the Navajo became great sheep herders and celebrated rug weavers, owning distinct trail sheep. Sheep are life to the Diné and have been an essential part of their culture and economy for hundreds of years.
1860 marked hundreds of years of trading, slave raids, and massacres between the Navajo and other tribes, Spain, and Mexico. America entered this picture in 1846, and in 2 short years they defeated Mexico, and all Mexican land was annexed into the United States. This included all Navajo land that the Americans believed was rich in silver and gold. The U.S. government and settlers thought they could make better use of this land than the Navajo people, while also bringing about law and order. The encounter between the Navajo people and the United States in the 1860s led to the death of thousands of Navajo people and the loss of their homeland that they had thrived in for hundreds of years. The future of the Diné was forever altered, and effects of this exchange continue today.
The goal of the United States during this period was to stretch the country from coast to coast, which led to the term Manifest Destiny. The U.S. government and settlers also wanted to use Navajo land to build mining companies, homes, and farms. This westward expansion removed all Native Americans from their homelands. Several tribes, including the Navajo, fiercely fought back against the U.S. expansion. The government tried to force the Native Americans onto reservations, believing this would end the uprising.
1860 was the beginning of the near extinction of the Navajo and their trail sheep. This period was known as the Fearing Time. In the summer of 1863, under the Abraham Lincoln administration, U.S. Major General James Carleton ordered Kit Carson to go to the Navajo Territory to persuade the Diné to surrender their land and move to a reservation. The Navajos refused. It was then that Kit Carson used a scorched earth policy to force the Navajo to surrender. All Navajo Hogans were burned to the ground, livestock were killed, water sources were cut off, and irrigated fields and orchards were completely destroyed. Without their valuable resources, the war of starvation had begun for the Navajo. By early 1864, thousands of freezing and hungry Navajo people surrendered to the U.S. Army, who had promised them food, clothing, livestock, and protection from their enemies.
In the spring of 1864, those who surrendered were forced to walk up to 450 miles to an internment camp in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, called Bosque Redondo. This is now known as the Long Walk to Hwéeldi. Hwéeldi is the Navajo name for Bosque Redondo. More than 8,500 Diné were captured or had surrendered. The Navajo were never told where they were being taken, how long it would take to get there, or why they were even going. They were not prepared for the harsh environment along the walk. Many were elderly or pregnant, malnourished, exhausted, and freezing. Approximately 200 documented people died of starvation and exposure to the elements during the long journey to Hwéeldi.
The internment camp was designed for 5,000 prisoners, yet twice as many were imprisoned there. Crop infestation caused every harvest to fail, so the army had to rely on meager food rations to feed the Navajo. Many died of starvation. Water from the nearby rivers caused disease, killing even more. The winters were bitterly cold, and the land lacked enough wood for shelter and firewood, leading to many exposure deaths. Sadly, about 1/3 of the Navajo died while imprisoned at Hwéeldi.
Adolf Hitler was later inspired by the efficiency in which the United States exterminated the American Indians through starvation and combat. The genocide of the Navajo by the United States government was admired and copied by Hitler, who studied the plans of Bosque Redondo to design the concentration camps for the Jews during World War II. Some Navajos never surrendered to the army during the long walk. They head out as far west as the Grand Canyon and as far north as Navajo Mountain and Bears Ears in Utah. Small groups that were prepared survived in isolated canyons. Hush Kanini, with his group, escaped to an isolated area of Navajo Mountain where they safely hid until 1868. Husting Kaia hid near his birthplace, a spot in Utah known as Bears Ears. His descendants still proudly tell stories about how he and his people never surrendered. His brother, Manuelito, a powerful and influential Navajo leader, also hid for several years in Bears Ears, avoiding soldiers while being attacked by Ute forces. Manuelito's people took pride in the fact that he was never captured and only surrendered when his forces were down to a few wounded and starving warriors.
4 years after the imprisonment began at Hwéeldi, a congressional committee investigated the expensive costs and horrible living conditions there, and the historic U.S. Navajo Treaty of 1868 was signed. This treaty allowed the Navajo to return to a small portion of their original homeland, now known as the Navajo Reservation. The boundaries of this newly formed reservation contained 10,000 square miles. On June 18, 1868, the Navajo were released from Bosque Redondo and began their long journey home to the reservation. Navajo people were confined to the reservation until the United States granted them citizenship in 1924, which allowed all Navajo people to travel freely outside the reservation boundaries. The 1868 treaty promised the Navajo tribe many things. The Navajos agreed to lay down their arms and be peaceful people in exchange for protection. The Navajo people were promised education for their children and, in return, agreed to send all children to school for a period of 10 years. Many Navajo children were sent to Indian boarding schools across the country for the next 100 years, until Navajo children were legally allowed to attend public schools closer to home in the 1950s. The Navajos were also promised health care and 15,000 sheep to replenish their exterminated flocks. Upon receiving their sheep, Chief Barboncito admonished the Dinétah not to eat the newly acquired sheep in order for them to replenish their flocks. Many other treaty promises were never fulfilled.
The treaty granted the Navajo tribe their sovereignty, which means the Navajo Nation became an independent nation within the United States of America. Today, the Navajo Nation is one of the largest tribes in the country, with over 300,000 enrolled members. It has one of the biggest tribal governments with a judicial system, legislative house, executive office, and a large law enforcement organization. The boundaries of the Navajo Nation have increased throughout the years. Chief Barboncito's advice about the livestock proved beneficial to the Navajo, as later they were given more reservation land to accommodate their growing flocks and increasing population. Today, the Navajo Reservation includes 27,425 square miles in Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. However, the size of the reservation is still much smaller than the area of land the Navajo people occupied before the Long Walk.
In 1983, President Ronald Reagan issued a policy statement which reaffirmed the government-to-government relationship of Native American tribes with the United States. The sovereignty of the Navajo Nation has been challenged many times, but has always been upheld by the Supreme Court. As a sovereign nation, the Navajo tribe over the years has petitioned the U.S. government for many different things, mostly concerning their water, land, and mineral rights. Navajo land is rich in natural minerals such as oil, gas, and coal. When all Navajo people were finally given the right to vote in 1957, it gave them an even stronger voice to be heard with. In 2016, the Navajo Nation government, as part of an intertribal coalition, asked President Obama to designate the Bears Ears area in southeastern Utah a national monument. Bears Ears is considered a place of protection as many Navajo people hid there during the Long Walk. As a result, many Dinétah lives were saved. Sacred ceremonial sites have been desecrated by vandalism and looting, and the Navajo Nation government believes Bears Ears will be better protected if it becomes a national monument. National monuments have special protections from Congress with the purpose of preserving places of historic or scientific interest.
Not all tribal members support the creation of a national monument at Bears Ears, because the U.S. government has a history of breaking promises and taking land away from the Navajo people. Some are afraid a national monument will mean they can no longer use the land to hunt, gather firewood, herbs, and medicine. The Dinétah have a deep connection to Bears Ears, which is part of their ancestral homeland, but is not part of the Navajo Reservation today. While there are different perspectives of what should happen to Bears Ears, one thing is certain. Bears Ears is a sacred place to the Dinétah because it is home to treasured cultural artifacts that tell the story of Navajo genealogy and survival. Bears Ears is a symbol of Navajo courage, strength, and resiliency during the long walk to Hwéeldi.
Kaia ashla dingo bith hahadzorgi bidana tai shithnili go benina bich adishne hala ajobado siasinia harite Kaia tasa anit athlandine ahir dahodilzin binajik ajoba bitili benahinita.